Imagine a car where the engine never touches the wheels, no gearbox, no mechanical connection, no direct transfer of power from combustion to motion. At first it sounds inefficient, almost absurd, because for over a century the logic of the automobile has been simple. The engine produces power, and that power must reach the wheels as directly as possible. Fewer steps, less loss, better efficiency. That was the rule. But what if that rule was wrong? What if adding more steps actually makes the system more efficient in the real world? And what if the future of the internal combustion engine is not to drive the car at all? Today, we're going to understand why. The story of the automobile has always been a story of connection. From the very beginning, the internal combustion engine was designed with one purpose in mind: convert fuel into motion, and deliver that motion to the wheels as directly as possible. And for more than a century, engineers refined that connection. First came simple transmissions, then multi-speed gearboxes, then dual-clutch systems, continuously variable transmissions, each iteration chasing the same goal: keep the engine in its optimal operating range, while still driving the wheels. Because here's the problem: an internal combustion engine is not a flexible machine. It behaves more like a very particular instrument, one that only performs well under very specific conditions. Too slow, and it struggles. Too fast, and it wastes energy. Too much load, too little load, and efficiency collapses. So the entire automotive industry built layers of mechanical complexity just to manage this limitation. Gearboxes became intricate systems of gears, clutches, and synchronizers, almost like mechanical computers, constantly adjusting ratios to keep the engine happy. And then came hybrids. At first, they looked like a revolution. Companies like Toyota introduced systems that could blend electric motors with combustion engines, allowing each to operate where they were most efficient. It was a clever compromise. The electric motor handled low-speed driving. The engine took over at higher speeds. And somewhere in between, they worked together. But even this solution didn't break the fundamental rule. The engine still had to drive the wheels. Always. Then, something different appeared. Not entirely new, but different enough to feel almost wrong. Early experiments like the Chevrolet Volt and later systems like Nissan's e-Power proposed a radical idea. What if the engine didn't drive the wheels at all? What if it simply generated electricity and let electric motors do all the driving? At first, the industry didn't take it seriously, because on paper it looked inefficient. Fuel to engine to generator to electricity to battery to motor to wheels. Too many steps. Too many conversions, too many losses. And yet, this is where the story becomes interesting. Because in the real world, not in theory, not in laboratory conditions, this inefficient architecture began to show something unexpected. It worked, sometimes better than the systems it was supposed to replace. So the question becomes unavoidable. If this idea has existed for decades, why is the industry only now starting to take it seriously? And more importantly, what did we misunderstand about efficiency all along? To understand why this architecture matters, it's necessary to step back and look at the engine itself. Not as a symbol of power, not as the heart of the car, but as a machine constrained by physics. The invisible limits of combustion. An internal combustion engine is, at its core, a heat engine. It burns fuel, converts chemical energy into heat, and then into mechanical motion. But this process is inherently inefficient. Even the most advanced modern engines rarely exceed 40% thermal efficiency under ideal conditions. And those ideal conditions are extremely narrow. A specific RPM, a specific load, a specific temperature range. Outside of that window, efficiency drops, sometimes dramatically. And this is the fundamental problem. Because real-world driving is anything but stable. Stop-and-go traffic, sudden acceleration, idle at traffic lights, cruising, braking, accelerating again. The engine is constantly being forced to operate outside its optimal range. It's like asking a concert pianist to perform perfectly, while randomly changing the tempo every few seconds. The result is predictable. Energy is wasted, fuel is burned inefficiently, and the system compensates, not by fixing the problem, but by adding complexity around it. The mechanical workaround. This is where the gearbox enters the story. For over a century, transmissions have been the industry's primary solution to this problem. By changing gear ratios, the system attempts to keep the engine operating near its optimal efficiency zone, while still matching the speed of the wheels. At low speeds, lower gears multiply torque. At high speeds, higher gears reduce engine strain. It's an elegant solution, but also a compromise. Because a gearbox doesn't eliminate inefficiency, it manages it. Every gear change introduces friction. Every mechanical connection adds loss. Every additional component increases weight and complexity. And modern transmissions, especially dual clutch and multi-speed systems, have become incredibly sophisticated. Dozens of moving parts, precision engineering, complex control systems, all designed to solve a single problem: the engine cannot adapt. The hidden cost of tradition. And this is where the deeper issue begins to reveal itself. Because the traditional architecture assumes something. It assumes that the engine must always be mechanically connected to the wheels. But that assumption comes at a cost. First, inefficiency. Even with advanced gearboxes, the engine spends most of its time operating outside its optimal range, especially in urban driving, where conditions are constantly changing. Second, complexity. A modern drivetrain is not a simple system. It's a layered structure of mechanical, hydraulic, and electronic components. Each one adds failure points. Each one adds cost. Third, rigidity. The system is fundamentally reactive. It responds to driving conditions, instead of controlling them. The engine speeds up because the driver accelerates. It slows down because the car slows down. It has no independence, no control over its own operating environment. And this leads to a surprising conclusion, one that challenges over a century of automotive design. The engine is not inefficient because it's poorly engineered. It's inefficient because we've been forcing it to do the wrong job. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because what if the problem was never the engine itself? What if the real problem was the assumption that it needed to drive the wheels at all? What if the engine could finally operate on its own terms, at a constant speed, at optimal efficiency, free from the chaos of real-world driving? And what if something else handled the driving instead? This is where the story changes, not with a better gearbox, not with a more advanced engine, but with a completely different idea of what the engine is supposed to be. Breakthrough technology and engineering. Breakdown. And this is where everything changes, because instead of trying to fix the engine, engineers began asking a different question. What if the engine didn't need to follow the driver at all? What if it could finally operate independently? A different role for the engine. In a series hybrid system, the engine is no longer connected to the wheels. Not through gears, not through shafts, not through any mechanical linkage. Instead, it is connected to a generator. Its only job, is to produce electricity. That electricity is then either sent directly to the motor or stored temporarily in a battery, and the motor, not the engine, drives the wheels, always. This may sound like a small change, but in engineering terms, it's a complete redefinition of the system, because the engine is no longer reacting to the road. It's no longer speeding up and slowing down with every change in driving conditions. Instead, it operates in isolation, at a constant speed, at a constant load, at its most efficient point. For the first time in automotive history, the engine is finally allowed to do what it does best. The architecture of energy flow. To understand why this matters, it helps to visualize the system differently. A traditional car is a chain of mechanical events. Fuel becomes combustion. Combustion becomes rotation. Rotation travels through gears, through shafts, through differentials, until it reaches the wheels. Every step introduces friction. Every component consumes energy. Now compare that to a series hybrid. Fuel becomes combustion. Combustion becomes electricity. And from that point forward, everything changes. Electricity flows. It doesn't require gears. It doesn't need mechanical synchronization. It doesn't suffer from the same kind of friction losses. The electric motor delivers torque instantly, precisely, continuously. It doesn't need to find the right gear. It simply responds. Why more steps can mean less loss. At first glance, the system seems inefficient. After all, energy is being converted multiple times, mechanical to electrical to chemical to electrical to mechanical. Each conversion has losses. So how can this possibly be better? The answer lies in something subtle, but critical. Control. In a traditional system, the engine is constantly forced to operate inefficiently because it must follow the driver. In a series hybrid, the engine is decoupled from that chaos. It can run at a fixed RPM where fuel combustion is most efficient. It can avoid idling, avoid rapid fluctuations, avoid inefficient load conditions, and over time. This stability outweighs the losses from energy conversion because the system is no longer optimizing for instantaneous efficiency. It's optimizing for average efficiency over time. And this is where the story becomes interesting, because real-world driving is not about perfection, it's about consistency. The electric motor advantage. At the same time, the electric motor changes the driving experience completely. Electric motors produce maximum torque from 0 revolutions per minute. No delay, no ramp-up, no waiting for revs to build. Acceleration becomes immediate, smooth, predictable, and because there is no gearbox, there are no gear shifts, no interruptions in power delivery, no mechanical hesitation. The car feels different, not like a machine struggling to adapt, but like a system that is always ready. The system as a whole. What emerges is not just a new powertrain, but a new philosophy of design. The engine becomes a generator, the battery becomes a buffer, the motor becomes the driver. Each component does one job, and does it well. Instead of forcing a single machine to do everything, the system is divided into specialized roles. And this specialization creates efficiency, not through simplicity, but through separation. And this leads to a realization that feels almost counterintuitive. The future of efficiency may not come from reducing complexity, but from reorganizing it. Comparison and industry impact. At this point, the question becomes unavoidable. If this system is so effective, why isn't everyone using it? The answer lies in how different companies interpret the future. Take Toyota, for example. For decades, Toyota has perfected the parallel hybrid system, a design where both the engine and the electric motor can drive the wheels. It's incredibly efficient, incredibly reliable. But it still follows the traditional philosophy. The engine remains part of the drivetrain. Then there's Tesla, a completely different approach. No engine at all, just batteries and electric motors. From a systems perspective, it's the simplest solution, but it comes with its own limitations. Charging infrastructure, battery cost, range anxiety, and somewhere in between. Companies like Nissan have taken a different path. With systems like e-Power, they've embraced the idea of the engine as a generator, not as a compromise, but as a deliberate architectural choice. So which approach is right? That depends on what problem is being solved. Pure EVs eliminate combustion entirely. Parallel hybrids optimize it. But series hybrids redefine its role. And this is where the industry tension becomes clear. Because this technology doesn't just improve efficiency, it challenges the direction of the entire automotive transition. Is the future fully electric? Or is there a middle ground where combustion survives, not as the driver, but as the power source behind the scenes? And if that's true, then this isn't just another hybrid system. It's a completely different way of thinking about the car itself. Cinematic conclusion. For more than a century, the automobile has followed a simple idea. The engine creates power, and that power must reach the wheels, directly, efficiently, without interruption. That idea shaped everything: gearboxes, drivetrains, entire engineering philosophies. It became unquestionable. But what if the problem was never the engine itself? What if the real limitation was how we chose to use it? Because in a series hybrid system, something subtle happens. The engine is no longer part of the driving experience. It disappears into the background, no longer reacting, no longer struggling to keep up. It simply runs, quietly, efficiently, at its best. And in doing so, it reveals something unexpected. That efficiency is not always about fewer steps. Sometimes, it's about putting each part of the system in the right role. The engine becomes a power plant, the motor becomes the driver, and the car becomes something else entirely. The future of the automobile may not belong to a single technology, not fully electric, not purely mechanical, but something in between. A system where old and new don't compete. They cooperate. Because in the end, the engine may not disappear. It may simply evolve into something we were never expecting.